The massive war room of the Thixian Empire buzzed with excitement. Dozens of alien officers stood around a giant glowing table that showed planets and star systems. At the center of it all, Admiral Coulter stared at a small blue dot floating. In the holographic display, Earth, just another backwater world waiting to be conquered. Coulter's 4 eyes focused on the rotating planet. The data stream showed him everything he needed to know. Humans were still fighting each other in small wars. Their weapons were primitive bullets and explosives. Their ships barely left their own atmosphere. This would be easier than taking candy from a child. Commander HFY, Coulter called to his second-in-command. A tall alien with purple skin and razor-sharp teeth. Remind me how our last conquest went. The Vorthan homeworld fell in exactly 3 days, sir, HFY replied, his voice filled. With pride, we used the standard pacification protocol. Orbital bombardment, ground troops, total surrender. The Admiral smiled, his mandibles clicking together with satisfaction. The Vorthons had been tough warriors, known throughout the galaxy for their fierce fighting spirit. If they could crush the Vorthons in 3 days, these humans would probably surrender after seeing their first alien ship. Excellent, Coulter said, waving his clawed hand over the holographic controls. The display zoomed in on Earth, showing the planet's major cities, military bases, and population centers. Look at this. They have over 200 separate nations, all fighting each other. Half their military budget goes to pointing weapons at their own species. The other officers in the room began laughing, a sound like grinding metal that echoed off the chamber walls. One of them, a squat alien with tentacles for arms, spoke up. Sir, their most advanced weapons are chemical explosives. Our personal shields can stop anything they have. And their fastest ships? Asked another officer. Barely faster than our cargo haulers, HFY replied, pulling up more data. They have a small space station and a few rovers on nearby planets. Primitive doesn't begin to describe it. Admiral Coulter nodded. Approvingly, this was exactly what he liked to hear. Easy conquests meant quick promotions and fewer casualties among his own forces. The Thixian Empire had built its reputation on swift, brutal victories. 17 worlds had already fallen to their might, and Earth would be number 18 to deploy. Fleet Unit 7, he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never lost a battle. Standard formation. 3 heavy cruisers, 12 destroyers, and 40 troop transports. We'll have this wrapped up before the next solar cycle. Meanwhile, billions of miles away on the very planet they were discussing, a completely different scene was unfolding. In the underground research facility beneath Seoul, South Korea, a young engineer named Day was hunched over his computer terminal. The coffee cup beside him had gone cold hours ago, but he didn't notice. His dark hair was messy from running. His hands through it, and his glasses reflected the glow of multiple monitors. Day worked for the International Space Monitoring Network. It's a secret organization that most governments didn't even know existed. His job was to watch the deep space sensors that had been quietly placed throughout the solar system over the past decade. Most days, he saw nothing but asteroids and space debris. Today was different. The lab door burst open with a loud bang, making Day jump in his chair. His colleague Yoon rushed in, her tablet clutched tightly in her hands. Her face was pale and her eyes were wide with something that looked like fear. Day, you need to see this right now, she said, her voice shaking. Slightly, the deep space monitors are picking up something massive, approaching the outer system. Day spun around in his chair, immediately alert. Massive, are we talking? Bigger than anything we've ever built, Yoon replied, sliding her tablet across the desk. The energy signatures are off the charts. Whatever this is, it's not from Earth. As Day looked at the data scrolling across the screen, his heart began to race. The readings showed dozens of objects moving in perfect formation, traveling at speeds that should have been impossible. They were still days away from Earth, but their trajectory was unmistakable. We need to contact the network immediately, Day said, his fingers already flying over his keyboard. If these readings are correct, we're about to have visitors.
Hey there.
The confident alien admiral nor the worried human engineer knew it yet. They were about to be part of something that would change the galaxy forever. The sky above. Earth suddenly tore open like a giant rip in reality itself. One moment, the morning sun was shining peacefully over major cities around the world. The next moment, massive alien ships were materializing out of thin air. Their hulls so large they blocked out the sun. The Thixian fleet didn't just arrive, they announced themselves with a show of overwhelming force. 37 warships, each one the size of a small city, took positions above Earth's most important locations. New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow, Beijing. Every major capital found itself living under the shadow of an alien dreadnought. Commander Coulter stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the beautiful blue planet rotate slowly beneath him. The ship's weapons arrays, which had turned entire civilizations to ash, gleamed menacingly in the sunlight. He felt the familiar thrill of another easy conquest about to begin. "Sir, we're receiving multiple communication attempts from the surface," reported his communications officer. "They're trying to contact us on dozens of different frequencies." "Let them wait," Coulter replied with a dismissive wave. "Fear makes the surrender sweeter." Begin the standard broadcast. Down on Earth, chaos was erupting in every major city. People poured out of buildings, pointing at the sky and taking pictures with their phones. News channels went into overdrive, broadcasting live footage of the alien ships to a world that had never been more united in its shock. In the emergency session hall of the United Nations in New York, Secretary General Hannah sat at the head of a table surrounded by world leaders, who had flown in within hours. The woman who had spent her career mediating disputes between nations now faced something far beyond anything in her experience. The main screen in the conference room flickered to life, showing the image of Admiral Coulter, his 4 eyes razor-sharp. Teeth and purple skin made him look like something from humanity's worst nightmares. When he spoke, his voice was translated by the ship's computer into perfect English. "People of Earth," the alien admiral began, his tone carrying the boredom of someone who had given this speech many times before. "I am Admiral Coulter of the Thixian Empire. Your planet has been selected for integration into our domain. Have one of your rotational periods to consider your options." The translator's mechanical voice continued as Coulter's image leaned forward menacingly. "Surrender immediately and submit to our authority, or face complete annihilation. We have conquered 17 worlds before yours. All of them made the smart choice eventually. I suggest you do the same." The transmission ended, leaving the UN chamber in stunned silence. Some of the world leaders were pale with shock. Others were whispering frantically to their advisors. A few were already reaching for their phones to contact their military commanders. Secretary General Hannah stood up slowly, her dark eyes fixed on the blank screen where the alien's face had been. She had spent 30 years in diplomacy, negotiating peace treaties and resolving conflicts. But this was different. This was about the survival of every human being on Earth. "Send our response," she commanded, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. The communications officer looked up nervously. "What should we tell them, Madam Secretary General?" Hannah's response was simple, clear, and would echo through history. "No." On his flagship above, Commander Coulter nearly choked on his breathing apparatus. In 17 previous conquests, he had never heard that word in response to his ultimatum. The Vorthans had tried to negotiate. The Zentari had begged for mercy. The Krelon had offered tribute. But no species had ever simply refused. "They refuse?" he sputtered, his mandibles clicking in confusion. "These primitives dare to reject the might of the Thixian Empire." His words were cut short as alarms began blaring throughout the ship. The tactical officer was shouting reports that made no sense. "Sir, we're detecting massive energy surges from the surface. Military installations worldwide are powering up defense systems. Missile silos are opening. Our orbital defense platforms are activating." Coulter stared at the tactical display in disbelief. Instead of the cowering population he had expected, Earth's surface was lighting up like a Christmas tree. Military bases that had been dormant were suddenly humming with activity. Weapons, systems that the Thixians had dismissed as primitive, were being moved into position. "This is impossible," he whispered. "They should be surrendering, not preparing for war." What the Thixian admiral didn't understand was that humans had one trait that no other species in the galaxy possessed. They got more dangerous when cornered, deep beneath the busy streets of Beijing. Dr. Bin barely looked up from her computer screen as she spoke into her headset. Her underground laboratory was buzzing with activity as dozens of scientists worked around the clock, studying pieces of alien technology that had fallen from the sky during the Thixians' demonstration attack. The fragments weren't much to look at: twisted metal, strange crystals, and components that seemed to bend light in impossible ways. But to Dr. Bin and her team, they were treasure. Each piece was a window into technology that was centuries ahead of anything humans had ever created. The energy signature is completely unlike anything we've seen before, she reported to General Tay, who was coordinating the global defense effort from his secure bunker. Her fingers moved rapidly across multiple keyboards as data streams flowed. Across dozens of monitors, their power source appears to be some kind of controlled fusion reaction, but the containment method is revolutionary. General Tay's voice crackled through the secure communication channel. Dr. Bin, I need a straight answer. How long until we can understand enough of this technology to use it against them? Ben paused for a moment, wiping the sweat from her forehead. She had been working for 14 hours straight, surviving on coffee and determination. Round her, other scientists were taking apart alien components with tools that had never been designed for this purpose. Give me 18 hours, she replied, her voice filled with the quiet confidence of someone who had never failed to solve a problem. Maybe less if we can get more samples. But sir, there's something else you need to know. What is it? The attack patterns from their demonstration strike? They're sloppy, overconfident. They hit our military base with enough force to destroy a small city. But they did it in the most obvious way possible. There's no creativity, no adaptation to local conditions. They're fighting like they've never faced real opposition. Dr. Bin pulled up a holographic display showing the trajectory and energy pattern of the alien attack. Look at this. They're not taking us seriously. They think we're just another primitive species that will roll over and surrender. That's their first mistake, General Tay replied grimly. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away on the surface, the real miracle of human adaptation was taking place. In a small neighborhood in Seoul, a man named Jin was doing something that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. He was organizing his neighbors into an effective defense network. Jin had been a simple office worker before the aliens arrived. He had never served in the military, never fired a weapon in anger, never even gotten into a serious fight. But when the giant alien ships appeared over his city, something awakened in him that he didn't know existed. Mrs. Park, you used to be a nurse, right? Jin asked the elderly woman who lived in the apartment next to his. We need you to set up a medical station in your basement, Mr. Cho. You're a mechanic. Can you help us modify these cars into something more useful? Within hours, Jin's ordinary neighborhood had transformed into a miniature fortress. Civilians who had never worked together before were now sharing resources, skills, and determination. The retired police officer was training teenagers how to handle weapons. The computer programmer was setting up secure communication networks. The restaurant owner was organizing food distribution. This scene was repeated millions of times across the globe. In Detroit, a factory worker named Soon was leading an effort that would have amazed the aliens if they had been paying attention. Soon worked at an automobile manufacturing plant. But within 6 hours of the alien ultimatum, she had convinced her supervisors to completely retool their production line. We can't make cars right now, Soon told her team as they gathered around the factory floor. But we can make something these aliens aren't expecting. The assembly line that had been producing civilian vehicles that morning was now churning out armored personnel carriers by evening. Workers who had been installing radio systems were now wiring military-grade communication equipment. The precision tools used for manufacturing car parts were being adapted to create weapons components. Soon's factory wasn't alone. Across the world, human ingenuity was turning everyday industrial capacity into a war machine. Electronics factories were producing communication jammers. Chemical plants were creating new types of explosives. Even food processing facilities were being converted to produce supplies for the growing resistance movement the aliens watching from orbit couldn't understand what they were seeing. In their experience, conquered species either surrendered immediately or fought with the same weapons and tactics they had always used. But humans were doing something different. They were evolving in real time, adapting their entire civilization to meet a threat they had never faced before. Dr. Ben looked up from her work as new data flowed across her screens. The energy readings from the alien ships showed they were maintaining the same power levels, using the same patrol patterns, following the same protocols they had probably used on 17 other worlds. "They're not adapting," she murmured to herself. "I think this is just another routine conquest." That would be their second mistake. The first rays of sunlight were just breaking over the Tokyo skyline when the Thixian attack began. Dozens of drop pods screamed through the atmosphere like falling meteors, their heat shields glowing white-hot as they punched through the morning clouds. The pods slammed into the streets with tremendous crashes, leaving craters in the asphalt and setting cars ablaze. Commander Coulter stood on his ship's bridge, watching the live feeds from his ground forces with the satisfaction of someone who had seen this exact scene play out on 17 different worlds. The tactical display showed green dots representing his soldiers spreading out across major cities worldwide. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The drop pod doors hissed open, and Thixian soldiers emerged in perfect formation. Each alien warrior stood nearly 8 feet tall, their purple skin covered by advanced combat armor that could deflect most projectile weapons. Their energy rifles hummed with power, capable of melting through steel like butter. "Ground Commander." Vexel reporting, came the voice over the communication channel. "Initial deployment successful. Resistance appears minimal. Human military response is scattered and uncoordinated." Coulter nodded approvingly. The humans were reacting exactly as expected, running in panic, their primitive weapons useless against superior alien technology. Few brave souls were firing assault rifles from behind overturned vehicles, but their bullets simply bounced off Thixian armor. "Excellent," Coulter replied. "Maintain standard formation. Secure the major population centers and government buildings. Victory within the next few hours should be." The transmission suddenly cut to static. The tactical display flickered, showing several green dots disappearing from the screen. Then more dots vanished. Within minutes, an entire squad had gone dark. "Commander Vexel, report your status," Coulter demanded. But only static answered him. 3 miles away? In the ruins of what had been downtown Tokyo. Yes. Special Forces Captain Wu crouched behind the twisted remains of a destroyed bus. His combat uniform was covered in dust and debris, but his eyes were sharp and focused as he watched the alien patrol moving through the street below. Captain, who had been studying the Thixian soldiers for the past 2 hours, and what he saw both amazed and worried him. These aliens were incredibly advanced, with technology that seemed like magic. But they moved like they were conquering frightened civilians, not trained soldiers. "They're walking in perfect formation," Wu whispered into his communication device, speaking to his team positioned throughout the rubble-strewn area. No scouts, no rear guard, no one watching their flanks. They're marching down the middle of the street like they're in a parade. His second-in-command, Sergeant Gabb, was hidden in the remains of a collapsed building about 50 meters away. "Sir, they're not even using cover. They're just walking in the open." Wu shook his head in disbelief. "They fight like they've never faced real opposition. These aliens have probably been conquering species that surrender immediately or fight with primitive weapons. They don't know how to handle an enemy that shoots back effectively." The Thixian patrol consisted of 12 soldiers, moving in a tight group down the main street. Their energy weapons were held casually, not at the ready. They weren't scanning the buildings for threats or watching for ambushes. They were behaving like tourists, not soldiers in enemy territory. "All units, this is Captain Wu." He spoke quietly into his com. "Execute flanking maneuver. Remember, we've studied their armor. The joints are weak points. Aim for the necks and arm connections." What happened next would be talked about in military academies for years to come. The Thixian soldiers, confident in their superiority, walked directly into a perfectly coordinated ambush. Human soldiers emerged from hiding spots in the rubble, their weapons aimed at the precise weak points in the alien armor. The battle was over in less than 30 seconds. The aliens, who had expected to face panicked civilians with primitive weapons, instead found themselves fighting highly trained soldiers who had spent hours studying their every movement. The Thixians' energy weapons were powerful, but they were too slow to respond to an enemy that moved like ghosts through the ruins. When the smoke cleared, 12 Thixian soldiers lay motionless in the street. Not a single human had been injured. Captain Wu's team quickly moved to secure the alien weapons and equipment, grinning with the satisfaction of a job well done. "Command, this is Captain Wu," he reported. "Package secured. Recommend immediate recovery of enemy equipment for analysis." The alien energy rifles were unlike anything the humans had ever seen, but they were about to become very familiar with them. Within hours, similar ambushes were taking place in cities around the world. The Thixians had made a critical error. They had assumed that primitive meant helpless. On his ship above, Commander Coulter stared at the tactical display in growing alarm. Green dots were disappearing faster than he could count. His ground forces, which should have been reporting easy victories, were instead sending desperate calls for reinforcement. "This is impossible," he muttered. "They're just primitives with crude weapons." But the humans were proving that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who refuses to fight fair. The interrogation room was small and windowless, lit by a single bright light that cast harsh shadows on the concrete walls. Captured Thixian officer Zekmar sat hunched in a chair that was too small for his 8-foot frame, his purple skin glistening with nervous sweat. His 4 eyes darted around the room, looking for escape routes that didn't exist. Across from him sat Agent Rim, a petite woman who looked like she might blow away in a strong wind. But there was something in her dark eyes that made the alien soldier deeply uncomfortable. When she spoke, her voice was calm and measured, and she was speaking perfect Thixian, a language that shouldn't have been possible for any human to learn. "Officer Zekmer," Agent Rim began, consulting a file folder in front of her. "You've been with the Thixian military for how long?" The alien's mandibles clicked together nervously, a sound like breaking glass. I don't have to answer your questions, primitive." Rim smiled slightly. "Actually, you do. You see, we've been monitoring your communications for the past week. We know about your family back on Nixer Prime, your mate, Valana, and your 3 offspring. We know about your military service record, your bank accounts, even your favorite, recreational activities." Zekmar's eyes widened in shock. "That's impossible. Our communications are encrypted with quantum cascade encryption." "Yes," Rim interrupted. "Very impressive technology. It took our computers almost 6 hours to crack it." She leaned forward slightly. "Your species is conquered. 17 worlds. What made you think we would be different?" The alien officer shifted uncomfortably in his chair. When he spoke, his voice carried the arrogance that had been drilled into every Thixian soldier from birth. "You are ... primitive. Your technology is crude, your society divided into hundreds of warring nations. You should have surrendered the moment you saw our ships." "Was divided," Rim corrected, her tone still perfectly calm. "Nothing unites humans quite like a common enemy. Tell me, in your 17 conquests, have you ever faced a species that gets stronger when cornered?" Zekmar opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. The question seemed to genuinely puzzle him, else in all his years of military service. He had never encountered a species that didn't either surrender immediately or fight with the same weapons and tactics they had always used. "The Vorthan were fierce warriors," he finally said. "They fought bravely. But they fought the same way they always had," Rim observed. "Same weapons, same tactics, same strategies. What about a species that completely changes how they fight, that adapts their entire civilization to meet a new threat?" The alien's silence was answer enough. Agent Rim opened her file folder and pulled out a series of photographs. "These were taken yesterday in Seoul. Recognize the weapons?" Zekmar looked at the images and his mandibles began clicking faster. The photos showed human soldiers carrying energy rifles that looked almost identical to Thixian weapons, but with subtle modifications that made them look more deadly. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Those weapons require quantum matrix power." cells. The manufacturing process takes years to master. Took us 18 hours, Rim replied matter-of-factly. We had some very motivated engineers working on the problem. Meanwhile, 300 miles away in an underground facility that hadn't existed a week ago, Engineer Q was proving Agent Rim's point. The vast bunker hummed with activity as hundreds of workers operated machinery that had been hastily converted from civilian manufacturing to military production. Q stood in front of a holographic display showing the internal structure of a Thixian energy rifle. His team had completely reverse-engineered the weapon, but they hadn't stopped there. They had improved it. The original design is elegant, Q explained to his team of engineers, pointing to different components in the hologram, but it's over-engineered. They built these weapons to last for centuries, which makes them reliable but inefficient. His colleague Jin, who had been working on the power systems, nodded in agreement. We can increase the energy output by 30% just by optimizing the power flow. And if we're not worried about the weapon lasting 100 years, we can make it much lighter and faster to manufacture. The production line behind them was churning out modified energy weapons at an incredible pace. Human workers who had been making automobiles or electronics just days before were now assembling weapons that could punch through Thixian armor like paper. How many units are we producing per hour? Q asked. 250 replied. Supervisor Hack, checking his tablet. And that's just this facility. We have 17 other locations running the same production line. The numbers were staggering. In less than a week, human industrial capacity had been completely retooled for war. Factories that had been producing consumer goods were now creating advanced weapons. Research facilities were developing new technologies. Even civilian workshops were contributing to the war effort. Back in the interrogation room, Agent Rim showed Zekmar more photographs. These showed human soldiers using tactics that no Thixian military manual had ever anticipated. Humans fighting from inside buildings, using the terrain as a weapon, coordinating attacks across vast distances with perfect timing. Your species. Fights like you're always conquering the same type of enemy, Rim observed. But we're not like the others, are we? Zekmar looked at the photos and felt something he had never experienced before in his military career: fear. These humans weren't fighting like primitives. They were fighting like predators who had found their prey. What do you want from me? He asked quietly. Rim smiled. Information. And maybe, if you're smart, a chance to survive what's coming next. Admiral Coulter's command bridge had become a place of constant tension and disbelief. The massive alien commander paced back and forth. Across the metallic floor, his four eyes scanning holographic displays that showed casualty reports he couldn't understand. Each step echoed through the chamber as his officers worked frantically at their stations, trying to make sense of what was happening on the planet below. Explain this to me again, Coulter demanded, stopping in front of his tactical officer. How are we losing entire battalions to a species that hasn't even achieved interstellar flight? Their most advanced spacecraft barely leave their atmosphere. His aide, a younger Thixian whose purple skin had grown pale with stress, nervously pulled up the latest tactical displays. The holographic projection showed Earth's surface covered in red warning markers, each one representing a failed Thixian operation or a successful human counterattack. Sir, they're not fighting like any other species we've encountered, the aide stammered, his mandibles clicking with anxiety. The Vorthan fought bravely but predictably. The Zentara used advanced technology but followed conventional tactics. These humans, they're doing something completely different. Coulter leaned forward, studying the tactical data. Different how? They use their environment as a weapon, the aide explained, highlighting several incidents on the holographic display. In the ruins of their cities, they've created elaborate trap systems. They collapse buildings on our patrols. They flood underground tunnels to cut off our supply lines. They even use their weather patterns against us. The Admiral's expression grew more confused. Weather patterns? Yes, sir, they somehow predicted. A thunderstorm in their region called Florida and used it to mask an attack on our forward base. The electrical interference from the storm disabled our sensors just long enough for them to strike. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. Aid brought up communication intercepts from human forces, and what the Thixians heard chilled them to their core. Sir, they coordinate across vast distances with perfect timing. Our intelligence suggests they're using some kind of distributed command structure. Every human seems to know what every other human is doing, but there's no central authority we can target. Coulter listened to recorded human communications, translated by the ship's computer. Instead of the fear and desperation he expected to hear, the humans sounded ... excited. They were laughing, joking, even singing as they fought. One recording captured a human soldier saying, "This is the most fun I've had since basic training." "Seem to enjoy the combat," the aide added quietly. "Sir, I think we may have awakened something that was meant to stay sleeping." Down on Earth, the Admiral's worst fears were becoming reality. In a converted garage in Detroit, a mechanic named Hack was putting the finishing touches on something that would have been impossible just a week earlier. Using his knowledge of heavy machinery and captured alien technology, he had welded Thixian energy cores to construction equipment, creating improvised mechs that moved like giant metal spiders. "Yoon, fire up the hydraulics," Hack called to his assistant as he climbed into the pilot seat of his creation. The machine was a bizarre fusion of human engineering and alien technology, a bulldozer chassis with mechanical arms that could lift 10 tons, powered by energy systems that the Thixians had thought were impossible to reverse engineer. "How's the energy output?" Yoon asked, monitoring the alien power core they had carefully extracted from a destroyed Thixian dropship. "Better than expected," Hack replied, testing the mechanical arms. "These energy cores are incredibly efficient. I think we can power this thing for weeks without recharging." Improvised mech stood up on its 6 legs, towering 15 feet above the garage floor. It wasn't pretty, but it was functional, and it was just one of hundreds being built in workshops across the planet. Meanwhile, in a small apartment in Seoul, an artist named Nay was waging psychological warfare with nothing but her laptop and her understanding of alien psychology. She had studied the intercepted Thixian communications and identified patterns in their thinking that could be exploited. "They're supremacists," she explained to her team of volunteer artists and writers. "They believe they're superior to every other species. That's their weakness. They can't handle the idea that primitives might outsmart them." Nay's team was creating propaganda materials that were being broadcast on frequencies the Thixians used for their own communications. The materials were designed to demoralize alien troops by showing them exactly how outmatched they were becoming. One of her most effective pieces was a simple video, showing human children playing with captured Thixian weapons like toys, laughing, as they figured out how to use advanced alien technology in minutes. "The goal isn't to make them angry," Nay explained. "It's to make them doubt themselves. When a warrior starts questioning whether they're really superior, they've already lost." Every human had become a weapon in their own unique way. Teachers were developing new training methods for civilian resistance fighters. Doctors were learning to treat wounds caused by alien weapons. Even children were contributing by helping to spot alien patrol patterns from their hiding places. The Thixians were learning that conquering Earth was like trying to fight a hive mind made of individual nightmares. Was unpredictable, creative, and utterly refusing to accept defeat. Worse, they were all connected in ways the aliens couldn't understand. Sharing information and coordinating attacks across continents, Admiral Coulter stared at the tactical display showing his forces being systematically destroyed by an enemy that shouldn't have been able to fight back. For the first time in his long military career, he was beginning to understand that his empire might have made a terrible mistake. "Captain." Wu crawled through the narrow ventilation shaft of the Thixian command ship, his breathing carefully controlled to avoid making any sound. The metal ductwork was barely wide enough for his shoulders, but he moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of infiltration. Behind him, 5 members of his elite team followed in perfect silence. What made this mission extraordinary wasn't just that humans had somehow gotten aboard an alien warship 3 miles above Earth's surface. It was what they were wearing and carrying. Captain Wu's combat suit was a patchwork of human engineering and captured Thixian technology. creating something that shouldn't have been possible. The armor plating was made from lightweight human composites reinforced with alien energy-absorbing materials. The helmet included a heads-up display that combined human tactical software with Thixian sensor technology, most impressive of all. The suit's power system used miniaturized alien energy cores that provided enough electricity to run the entire system for weeks. Navigation control room is 30 meters ahead, Wu whispered into his cum unit, his voice barely audible even. To his own team. Remember, we hit fast and quiet. No witnesses, no alarms. His second-in-command, Sergeant Gabb, checked the strange weapon strapped to his back. It looked like a human assault rifle that had been rebuilt by someone with access to alien technology. The barrel glowed with a faint blue light, and the entire weapon hummed with barely contained energy. "Sir, how are we even breathing up here?" whispered Private Jin, the youngest member of the team. "Shouldn't the air be toxic to humans?" Dr. Bin's team figured out their atmospheric processors, Wu replied quietly. "Turns out they use a standard oxygen-nitrogen mix. This makes sense if you're planning to occupy worlds with different atmospheres." The team reached a junction in the ventilation system where they could see down into the ship's navigation control center. Through the metal grating, they observed 4 Thixian technicians working at holographic displays, completely unaware that death was hanging literally over their heads. "Target the navigation systems first." Wu signaled to Gabb using hand gestures. "Then we take their communications. If we can blind them and cut off their ability to coordinate with the other ships, the orbital defense platforms can pick them off one by one." What the Thixians didn't know was that humans had been planning this operation for days. The infiltration team had studied captured alien technology to understand exactly how Thixian ships operated. They knew where every critical system was located, how to disable them, and most importantly, how to do it without triggering the ship's automatic defenses. Meanwhile, down on Earth's surface, a completely different drama was unfolding. The roles had completely reversed from the early days of the invasion. Thixian patrol units moved through human cities like nervous prey animals, their weapons constantly at the ready, their heads turning at every shadow and sound. In the ruins of downtown Bangkok, a squad of 8 Thixian soldiers crept through what had once been a busy shopping district. Their purple skin was streaked with dirt and sweat, and their eyes darted constantly between the windows of damaged buildings. These weren't the confident conquerors who had landed on Earth just weeks ago. "Contact rearguard," whispered the squad. Leader into his communication device. "Any sign of human activity?" "Negative," came the reply. "But sir, this feels wrong. It's too quiet." The squad leader knew exactly what his subordinate meant. Human cities were never quiet. Even in the middle of a war zone, there should be sounds of movement, voices, machinery. This silence felt like a trap. "They're watching us," muttered one. Of the soldiers, "I can feel it." He was right. From hidden positions throughout the ruined district, human fighters were tracking every movement of the alien patrol. But these weren't the desperate civilians who had hidden in basements during the first days of the invasion. These were organized, well-equipped, and very patient hunters. Dr. Bin's voice suddenly crackled through communication systems worldwide, reaching every human resistance cell, every military unit, every civilian who had volunteered to fight. Message was simple but electrifying. Phase 2 is ready. We're taking the fight to them. The signal triggered coordinated attacks across the globe. Human forces that had been playing defense for weeks suddenly switched to offensive operations. The improvised mechs that Mechanic Hack had been building rolled out of hidden garages. The energy weapons that Engineer Q had been mass-producing were distributed to fighters who had spent days learning how to use them. But the real surprise was happening in orbit. The Thixians had always assumed that humans were trapped on the surface of their own planet, unable to threaten the invasion fleet hanging safely in space. They were wrong. Captain Wu's team dropped through the ventilation grating into the navigation control center like deadly ghosts. The 4 Thixian technicians didn't even have time to sound an alarm before they were unconscious on the floor. Within minutes, the human infiltrators had complete control of the ship's navigation and communication systems. "This is Team Alpha," Wu reported through his comm unit. We have control of Command Ship 7, beginning Phase 2 protocols. All across Earth's orbital space, similar operations were taking place. Human infiltration teams had somehow gotten aboard dozens of Thixian ships, using technology that combined the best of both species' capabilities. The hunters had become the hunted, and the aliens were about to discover that humans were very, very good at this game. From his position in the captured navigation center, Captain Wu looked down at Earth through the ship's viewports. The planet that the Thixians had thought would be an easy conquest was about to show them what humans could really do when they stopped playing defense and started playing to win. Admiral Bull, Coulter's command bridge had become a nightmare of flashing warning lights and screaming alarms. The massive alien commander stood in the center of the chaos, his 4 eyes wide with disbelief as he watched his mighty invasion fleet being systematically destroyed by an enemy that shouldn't have been able to fight back. "Report," he bellowed. Over the noise, his voice cracking with desperation, his tactical officer, a veteran of dozens of successful conquests, looked up from his station with the expression of someone who had seen the impossible. "Sir, we've lost 18 ships in the last hour. Half our remaining fleet is completely crippled, their computer systems corrupted by some kind of human cyber warfare." The holographic tactical display showed the remains of the once proud Thixian fleet. Ships that had conquered 17 worlds were now drifting helplessly in space, their hulls dark and their weapons silent. Others were spinning out of control, their navigation systems hijacked by human infiltrators who had somehow gotten aboard. "The humans have taken control of our own defense platforms," the officer continued, his voice shaking. "The orbital weapons we installed to protect our ships are now firing at us." Coulter stared at the tactical display in horror. The defense platforms that his engineers had positioned around Earth just days ago were now glowing with energy as they targeted his own vessels. Technology that had been primitive when the invasion began was now devastatingly effective. Upgraded with captured Thixian systems and human innovation. "Sir," his aide reported, his voice barely above a whisper, "we're receiving surrender requests from our own ground forces." The Admiral's mandibles clicked together in confusion. "Surrender requests? From our soldiers?" "Yes, sir. They're afraid of the humans." The communication console crackled to life with desperate voices from Thixian ground commanders. What Coulter heard made his blood run cold. "Command, this is Ground Unit 12. We need immediate extraction. The humans aren't just fighting us anymore. They're hunting us. They know our patrol routes, our communication frequencies, our tactics. It's like they can read our minds." Another voice broke through the static. "Ground Unit 7 requesting emergency evacuation. The humans have surrounded our position with some kind of mechanical creatures. They're using our own energy weapons against us, but they've made them more powerful somehow." The reports kept coming, each one more terrifying than the last. Thixian soldiers who had conquered worlds were now begging to be rescued from a species they had dismissed as primitive just weeks ago. On the main screen, Admiral Coulter watched something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Human ships were engaging his warships in direct combat, and they were winning. But these weren't sleek military vessels built for war. They were cargo haulers, research ships, converted civilian spacecraft that had been transformed into weapons of war. One human ship looked like it had been built from spare parts and scrap metal. It was tearing through a Thixian destroyer with weapons that shouldn't have existed. Another vessel, clearly a former mining ship, was using industrial drilling equipment modified with alien energy cores to punch holes through advanced military armor. "How is this possible?" Coulter whispered, his voice filled with a fear he had never experienced before. "They're using civilian ships against our military fleet." The answer came from an unexpected source. The communications console suddenly picked up a transmission on the Thixian military frequency. A human voice spoke in perfect Thixian, the accent flawless and the tone calm and confident. "Admiral Coulter, this is Captain Wu of the Earth Defense Force. You attacked our home. Did you really think we wouldn't fight back?" The alien admiral's legs nearly gave out beneath him. "Impossible? How do you know our language?" How are you accessing our communications? We've been studying you since the day you arrived, the human voice replied. We know how your ships work, how your weapons function, how your soldiers think. We know about your 17 previous conquests, and we know why you thought we would. Be easy, prey. Captain Wu's voice continued, and each word was like a knife in Coulter's heart. You made one critical mistake, Admiral. You assumed that primitive meant helpless. You thought that divided meant weak. You believed that, because we hadn't achieved interstellar flight, we couldn't defend ourselves. Tactical displays showed more Thixian ships going dark as human forces systematically disabled them. The invasion fleet that had arrived with such confidence was now barely holding together. But we're not like the other species you've conquered, the human continued. We don't surrender when faced with superior technology. We adapt, we innovate, we turn your own weapons against you. Admiral Coulter watched helplessly as another of his ships was boarded by human infiltrators. The crew's desperate communications were cut short as the vessel's lights went out one by one. You wanted to conquer Earth, Captain Wu said, his voice now carrying a note of steel. Instead, you've united us. You've given us a common enemy and a reason to become something we've never been before. The alien admiral finally understood the terrible truth. His species had awakened something that should have been left sleeping. The humans weren't just defending their world. They were becoming the very thing the Thixians had once been. A species capable of conquering the galaxy. What do you want? Coulter asked, his voice barely audible. Surrender, came the simple reply. While you still can. The space around Earth looked like a graveyard of broken dreams. The once mighty Thixian invasion fleet hung motionless in the void, their hulls dark and their weapons systems powered down. Ships that had terrorized 17 worlds now drifted helplessly, their crews waiting for a fate they couldn't predict. Admiral Coulter stood alone on his flagship's bridge, surrounded by the wreckage of his military career. The holographic displays that had once shown him tactical advantages now displayed only surrender notifications from his surviving ships. His officers sat at their stations in stunned silence, unable to comprehend how their superior technology and military might had been defeated by a species they had dismissed as primitive. The main communication screen flickered to life, and Admiral Coulter found himself face to face with Secretary General Hannah. The human leader looked tired but determined, her dark eyes reflecting the weight of decisions that would shape the galaxy's future. Admiral Coulter, Hannah began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just won an impossible war. I believe you have something to say. The alien commander's mandibles clicked together as he struggled to form words that his species had never spoken in defeat. We surrender, he said finally, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. We await your terms. Coulter expected demands for tribute, threats of retaliation, or the complete destruction of his forces. That's what the Thixians would have done. That's what every conquering species did. Instead, Hannah's response shocked him to his core. Return to your territory, she said calmly. Release all enslaved species under your control. Dismantle your military conquest programs. Any future aggression against Earth or our allies will be met with appropriate force. The alien admiral blinked his 4 eyes in confusion. That's all? In return, Hannah continued, we offer trade agreements and technological exchange. We're willing to share our advances in energy systems, manufacturing, and defensive technologies. We believe cooperation is more beneficial than conquest. Legs nearly gave out beneath him. You're not going to destroy us? Execute our crews? Enslave our worlds? For the first time since the conversation began, Hannah smiled slightly. We're not conquerors, Admiral. We're protectors. There's a difference. The concept was so foreign to Thixian thinking that Coulter couldn't immediately process it. His species had built their entire civilization on the idea that the strong dominated the weak. The notion that a victorious species would show mercy was beyond his understanding. I don't understand, he admitted. You have the power to destroy us. Why don't you? Because that's not who we are, Hannah replied. We fought you because you threatened our home and our freedom. Now that the threat is over, we have no desire for revenge. We want to build something better. Within hours, news of the Thixians' surrender was spreading through the galaxy's communication networks. Species that had lived in fear of the Thixian Empire for generations suddenly found themselves free. The 17 worlds that had been conquered were liberated, their peoples returning to self-governance for the first time in decades. But it wasn't just the conquered worlds that took notice. Advanced civilizations that had remained hidden to avoid Thixian attention began reaching out to this new power called humanity. The Zephyrian Council, the Kree Collective, the Vorthan Federation, all of them wanted to understand the species that had accomplished the impossible. Dr. Bin, now serving as Earth's chief technology advisor, found herself overwhelmed with requests for meetings. "We're receiving communication attempts from over 40 different species," she reported to Secretary General Hannah. "They all want to establish diplomatic relations." "What are they saying?" Hannah asked. "Mostly, they want to know if we're planning to replace the Thixians as the galaxy's dominant military power," Dr. Bin replied. "They're offering tribute, military alliances, trade agreements, basically everything they can think of to stay on our good side." Hannah shook her head. "Tell them we're not interested in domination. We want partnerships, not subjects." Meanwhile, in a secure facility on the outskirts of Geneva, Admiral Coulter was completing his final report to the Thixian High Command. The document would become one of the most important historical records in galactic history. "We have encountered something beyond our understanding," he wrote. "They call themselves human. They are not primitive. They're not weak. They are the most dangerous species in the galaxy because they choose not to be." He paused, staring at the words on his screen. "Their technology is now equal to ours, possibly superior. Their military tactics are innovative and unpredictable. But their greatest strength is not their weapons or their ships. It is their refusal to become what we are." Coulter's final paragraph would be quoted for generations. "The humans defeated us not because they were stronger, but because they were better. They showed us that there is another way to be powerful, through protection rather than conquest, through cooperation rather than domination. We came to conquer a primitive world. Instead, we have been conquered by a superior philosophy." The age of human isolation was over. The age of human protection had begun. And the galaxy would never be the same.